Welcome to the very first episode of the podcast Unstoppable Indian Women. In this series, we celebrate the remarkable journeys of Indian women who have overcome challenges with unwavering strength and determination. Each episode will highlight inspiring stories of resilience, empowerment, and the incredible impact that these women have made in their communities and beyond. Joining us today is Anu Shultes. Anu is the CEO of a fintech startup, DashFi, with a mission to reduce the cost of ownership of cars for consumers. Anu is a strong operator with deep experience in lending and technology and is passionate about helping people moving out of poverty. Previously, she was the CEO and founder of Ahead Financials and has held various GM and leadership positions in companies at the forefront of defining financial equity, inclusion, and service for the world's emerging middle class. For her work and impact, Anu was recognized as part of the Forbes inaugural 50 over 50 list in 2021. In the same year, she was also named to Google Ventures Impact List, which showcases noteworthy women and non binary people who have made tangible differences to their company's culture and success. Welcome to the podcast, Anu.
Thank you so much, Madhumita. I'm excited to be here and share my story.
Yeah. So today's podcast aims to raise the awareness about breast cancer in the Indian American community and empower women to navigate this challenge while balancing their health, family, and work. As all of you know, Indian Americans are one of the fastest growing ethnic minorities in the United States. And unfortunately, breast cancer rates are also rising in our community. According to a study done by Stanford, the incidence of this disease is increasing at a rate of 1.9% annually, which means that 1 in 8 women are expected to develop breast cancer in their lifetime. And if you look at the numbers in India, breast cancer is the most common cancer among women, accounting for 25% of all the female cancers. Breast cancer in Indian women presents distinct challenges. This is because we get it when we are younger, it's more aggressive due to our genetic factors. And in addition to that, there is also a lot of social stigma around breast cancer, and it's extremely difficult to communicate the diagnosis to the family members and friends. So, now let's begin our conversation with Anu, who has had first hand experience dealing with breast cancer. So, Anu, you were diagnosed with breast cancer at 40 and you had three very young children. So,
Yes.
what were some of the biggest challenges that you saw while, balancing your personal health journey, your family, and this passion that you have for your work?
Yeah, so, you know, life is kind of very funny this way, right? So, moving along, we are all focused on our career and we're trying to define what work-life balance is. And then, like, one day during a self-exam, you find a lump, right? And then that's what happened to me. It was summer after it was just 3 months after I turned 40. Um, my first instinct was to dismiss it, right? So it was just not, I kind of said, oh, it's probably a fluke, it's probably nothing. It's probably, you hear about this a lot. Some women have um, thick or lumpy breast tissue or whatever these things you hear. But basically, then I checked again a month later and it felt bigger. And then I was actually pushed into going to a doctor because a good friend of mine actually was very involved with the Bras for a Cause. It's in Livermore. It's a, it's they do an event to raise money and awareness. And so I promised her I'll get an exam done before the Susan B. Komen walk. And so I made an appointment. And then I'll tell you, things move so fast. Like the time between the day I went to see a OBGYN for the first time to me having surgery was like 3 weeks. So going back to a question on what was it like, right? It's hard to describe what it's like because it's a lot of shock, and part of it is, I'm an optimist, So every step of the way, I just assumed, okay, it's a lump, they'll remove it, and then I'll be done, you know? Then the pathology comes back, and then it's like, okay, there'll be, hopefully there won't be chemo. Maybe it's just radiation. Oh, I have to do chemo now. Okay. Maybe it's only for like 3 months, right? But it was like a year. It was 6 months of what they call traditional chemotherapy, and then another 9 months of another weekly, um, basically infusion. So the long and short of it is, you're not at that in that moment, it's about getting through the day, getting through the week, and figuring out what's going to happen next. And it doesn't really hit you. And I would say that I didn't hit bottom like emotionally until probably 3 months in. Like I was diagnosed September 5th, and I think I remember kind of feeling totally lost and hopeless Christmas Eve. And it's in my mind because my dad, who was my parents were visiting to help me, he came and talked to me about, why I shouldn't feel hopeless. And so the long and short of it is you don't know. There's no like playbook, right? They tried to help you, the doctors, and I know there's more services today than there were 15 years ago. They try to help you and say, to give you a process to cope, but it's a very personal journey and there is no playbook. So part of the reason I've been sharing my stories because I want people to know that it's okay to feel lost, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. And the, the other thing is, it's okay to tell people, hey, I don't want advice. There's a lot of people who'll just come up to you and give you random advice. It's like pregnancy. They'll be like, oh, you should have smoothies with flaxseed every morning, things like that. And it's totally okay to say thanks and just walk away, or just say, hey, it's okay, I'm overwhelmed right now. Let's talk about it another time. So that's like the long and short of it is how did I manage it? I think my plan was to just get through every day. I planned only for the day. And then the next day, I'm like, I'm going to get through today. And that's what it is. You cannot, everything about your ambitions, hey, how my career path, what's going to become of our life, all of that goes out the window because you're not sure if you're going to make it to the next month or the next year. So it's a very humbling experience. But looking back 15 years later, it was also a very empowering experience. And I know we're going to talk more about that.
Definitely. I think you touched upon drawing boundaries. Was it like, the culture that we come from, we pretty much don't have boundaries. Was that something that was different for you, or did this experience teach you how to draw the boundaries?
So I definitely, learned how to draw the boundaries because you're so overwhelmed that you're less concerned about, hey, I don't want to be rude. Like I think part of it is, and by the way, it wasn't just boundary, like these, it wasn't just our community. There were like people at work who are not Indian who would give me advice about like smoothies, and they would drop off like, chia seeds. And you just, if it's just they're dropping it off, you take it, right? But then if they're like, hey, you should have this or you should have that, or my aunt had this. And the biggest thing I had was people, family and friends calling me and telling me about their experience, about someone else they knew had the same type of thing, and this is what they did. And, and then someone who's within the family, they have exposure to the medical field, kind of saying, hey, here's a doctor, he's a friend of mine. Can you send me can you send me your um mammogram
Reports. Yeah.
pathology? And it's just like, but I'm just trying to get through this myself, right? It's not that I don't want to say I don't need your help, but I think I had to tell my closest family that I want them to help me, but I need them to listen to me on what help I need, you know? So my parents actually came from India. Like they were already like traveling back and forth, and they were already like sort of immigrated. So it wasn't a big deal. They were coming and going anyway, but they were with my sister at the time, and I called them and they immediately came. They stayed with me for 6 months, and they don't drive, but they could cook and they could make sure my kids' lunches were packed and things like that. And I had to tell my other family to just give me space, and I will share with them my pathology and all that. But I just needed them to understand that I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to cope, you know. And I did end up needing financial help. So I did reach out. So there's a lot of, when you get cancer, I don't know about breast cancer in general, cancer, I've had other experience since with, my husband as well. it's not just the health piece, it's the financial piece. It's the how am I going to get through today because I have kids and they have to go to school and, you know, parent teacher conferences and making the kids feel like this is going to be okay. I think that is actually the hardest part. You know, I put up a facade to my kids because my kids were, you know, 2.5, let's just say 2, 6, and 9. I put up a facade to my kids that I'm going to be okay, even though I didn't believe it, by going to work. I never went on disability. I went to all the parent teacher conferences. I didn't miss a school event. And I did all that just for them to feel like it's going to be okay. And interestingly, years later, when my husband got sick a few years ago, my kids said that, hey, you did fine, he'll be fine. So it's funny because how you kind of the lessons you know, teach your kids, some of them stick with them. So I think as a result of this, even my kids are resilient.
Yeah, that's, I think, definitely a very hard part, and I'm so happy to hear your story about how you were able to like give them a sense of stability. Like, I think when the kids are that small, they just want to have that sense of stability, and you were able to provide that to them, and they've also learned from the experience. So
Yeah.
you touched a little bit upon the financial aspect of it. Like,
Yeah.
were there specific challenges that you faced? You said you didn't go on disability, but I'm sure there was medical bills, there were childcare costs,
Exactly.
and things like that that came into picture. Would you like to tell us a little bit more
Yeah,
about that?
actually, my my overall experience with breast cancer was extremely harrowing because it wasn't just that, you know, I was the first in the family to get it. We didn't have a history of cancer. It's kind of like comes out of nowhere, you know? Like I wasn't even really feeling sick before I found the lump. So it was just like I was tired. We had just moved from Florida. My husband was still commuting in a way, like he was, you know, he was still finding his way back to California. I was a single mom with a new job. So I just said, "Oh, I'm tired because so much going
There's
on."
just so much going on, right? Yeah.
So, um, you're not really expecting any of this, right? So I had, and also 2008, if you remember, was a housing crisis.
Yes.
So I had moved from Florida. My house was on the market. So we had basically, we were paying a mortgage and we were paying rent in California. So it was like already, we were already stretched when I got sick, right? Um, and you just, you know, when you're in your 40s and you're you know, mid-career executive, and my husband had a decent job, it was just a matter of him figuring out how to, you know, get a position in California. We're like, yeah, it's just a temporary phase. The house is going to sell. We're going to get back to where we want to be, et cetera, right? And then this hit, and it's overwhelming. I worked for a startup, so my medical insurance was through my husband. So we have this mortgage sitting, right? So we have to still pay the mortgage because we didn't want to just walk away from our house. Because it would, I mean, I'm also from financial services. It never even occurred to me to like give up on the house and just walk away, right? We were going to sell it and find a way to like keep making payments. So then my husband's company was the medical insurance, okay? And he actually was posted to Texas. And then when I got sick, his company gave him a chance to move to Vegas. So it was closer, but the company didn't have positions in the Bay Area. And so my husband couldn't just leave his job because we needed the insurance, right? So I was kind of in a place where, as a single mom, I was very sick. And my husband, who really just wanted to be with me, couldn't be. And so by moving to Vegas, he was able to come home Friday nights and he would leave Sunday nights. And I scheduled my chemos for Fridays. And so coming back to the financial piece, so we had this burden. And then, you know, even the best of insurance is like 80%, right? They'll pay 80% until you hit the max or whatever. And because my treatment started September, the whole like deductible resets in January. So there's all these nuances you don't even think about, you know? So you hit the max for 1 year and then you get into January 1st, it's like a whole nother deductible, you know? And so 80% they paid, but 20% was hefty. Like I had this injection that I had to get. So I had the first 4 chemos were um, supposed to be every 3 weeks apart, but in order to accelerate, medical advance is great. In order to accelerate it to every 2 weeks, I got the chemo This first set was on a Thursday, and then on Friday, I had to go back in and get a shot that basically boosted white cell production. And that injection was 5,000 per injection. So imagine 20% of that,
Yeah.
right? Every other week.
Yeah.
So costs quickly added up, right? And then we ended up actually, hindsight's 2020, this is all we felt we could do was we dipped into our retirement and then we paid the price for it because you dip into the retirement in September, you get a hefty fine when you file taxes in
Hmm.
April. So there's so many lessons we learned financially as well. And that made my life that much more harder. When I talked to you about feeling hopeless in December, it was physically how I was feeling and not knowing what life is going to hold and realizing that as someone who's been in financial services for 20 years, didn't feel like I had done anything right, you know? So
Hmm.
we had to, my husband and I figure out a lot of things. And then we got help from family, close family. We got loans and we managed, right? And then when I came out of all of this in end of 2009, I was just driven to go make things happen. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. Like we had a horrible year. We were lucky to have friends and family to support. And it wasn't just financial. The school, my kids were in elementary school, they didn't have a therapist, but they did take my kids out into this program called a Rainbow Program, where once a week they got to sit with, I think it's a school counselor, and really just spend time with them. So it was kind of a form of therapy. My coworkers took me to chemo when my husband wasn't around. They waited and brought me home. I had the CEO's admin because I was at a startup. She would come in early at 6 if I had like an early scan. So she would take my kids to school. Like I had a community of people. It takes a village to get through breast cancer or any kind of cancer. And I had that village instantly form around me. But it's always so embarrassing to ask for money. It's so hard to think that you failed as a person, as an educated person with multiple master's degrees and a husband who has a PhD, and we've been doing really well in our careers to feel in that moment that, wow, how did we get here? And all of it tumbled over 12 months. In 12 months, right? We used to be homeowners to a really large executive home in Florida with good careers. I made the choice to move to California, not knowing I was sick. We didn't know housing market was going to crash because I moved in 2007 and it was already crashing in Florida, but we didn't see it. So it was one of those things where you just get hit by a tsunami. It's almost like three tsunamis: a financial, a health, a job, and you kind of figure out how you're going to get on the other side of it, you know?
Do you think there are like structural problems in the way our society is set up that when we actually get hit by something this big, everything falls apart? You talked about the great support that you got, but at the same time, it was still a difficult journey. And I think one part that you talked about was this entire financial help about getting through the treatment and stuff was like extremely hard. So do you think there are structural changes that can be made to make this easier on people?
I think so. I think the medical, at least in the US, and I know it's in India as well, because since then I've had cousins who've had the same pathology and had the same set of treatments. And I think that it is equalizing in terms of access. Um, but even they talk to me about should we forego this treatment because it's so expensive? We have the money, but we really saved it up for our daughter's wedding. And what do you think? Was it effective? Like these were the discussions I'm having with a second cousin, like 10 years later about whether the treatment was worth it. Um, I do think that things have come a long way now. I know that people who are diagnosed now are also provided support immediately from a counseling support at the doctor's office.
Yes.
I didn't have that, right? I had to deal with my emotional turmoil on my own. Like I remember I loved my doctor to pieces. It was hard for me when he also died of cancer like 8 years later and I had to switch to another doctor in the same practice. But when I told him I feel terrible and he said, that's part of the game. You're going to feel this way. And that's all the resources he had at the time. But now I know that if you go to the same office, part of it is they already refer you to a counselor, they talk to you about it, they send you to a dietitian, and but I don't know if they're sending you to also a financial counselor, someone who can sit with you and say, hold on one second, I'm going to plug in my Someone who can sit with you and say, hey, this is going to be hard. This is your treatment estimate. Let's figure out how you're going to make this work, you know? That would have been great. The fact that I had a house under this whole housing crisis, that's like they could not have done anything about it. But it would have been helpful to have kind of a plan financially and sit with them and say, here's how long your treatment is. My treatment was close to 12 months, and it was supposed to be another
Hmm.
3 months. And my doctor stopped it. He felt pity for me because I had to go through this weekly infusion for a year called Herceptin, and I was allergic to it. And what they did was they just pumped me up with Benadryl and they gave it to me anyway. But 9 months in, I started to have real physical problems, like skin issues. And I just told him, I feel like I cannot go out. Like I'm still working. So he said, you know what? You've had 9 months out of 12. I think that's plenty. Let's stop. So he was able to advise me on all the medical stuff. It would have been great at the beginning for them to say, your treatment's going to be a year and 3 months. This is your
Hmm.
estimated expense. And based on your insurance, we think this is what it'll cost you. Help you. They're not going to give us the money, but help us plan. Because the worst thing is you start the treatment, and they're so kind. They don't want to talk about finances. The great thing about the US is, especially where I was in the area, you go in, they treat you, no questions asked, right? 2 months later, you start getting these bills, right? First of all, they send you a 10-page bill. It ends up like $150,000. And then it's what insurance paid. And yes, you owe $20,000, but it's a big hit. I understand, like, I only owe 10% of the total or whatever, but my God, like, would have been great to not get a 10-page bill as a
Yes.
surprise, right? And you see things like the tube of Neosporin they used after surgery was $45. And you start reading the fine print and you go, why is it like this? Like, could I just brought my own Neosporin? Like, so I think everybody knows that the costs here are like inflated, and then there's this push pull between, insurance and doctors, whatever. But I think the patients end up being collateral damage, and that's just a fact. So it was like the death by a thousand cuts. First I had to go through chemo, then the second set of chemo was first set of chemo was toxic. They told me it'll damage my heart, so I had to go in for heart scans every month. And the second set of chemo was concurrent with Herceptin. I was severely allergic. And so then they would pump me up with Benadryl, come home like a zombie on Friday, and then sleep the weekend. Between sleeping and, getting sick, then I would be back at work on Monday. But the financial piece, I already had the house issue, but the financial, every time the mailbox, I would see something with the hospital, like my heart would sink. I didn't want to open it. To this day, when I get a doctor's bill, that's the last thing I open.
Yeah. I think that's definitely, I even heard from a person recently, a young woman, she got her surgery done, and on the very same day, she lost her job. And so she does not know how she would pay the next set of bills for the chemotherapy. And so she's trying to figure out what to do next. And I agree with you, like, make probably having a plan in place would help people like figure out how to like deal with this. So I think the next question that I have for you is that this entire experience, how has it influenced your approach to work and entrepreneurship?
So, you know, it took me for the first couple years after I got sick, I was angry. Like when I went back to work in 2000, and I mean, when I went back, I was already working, but when I really like when I was finished with the treatment, and even during the treatment, and I at the time I attributed it to chemo. I would just say things I'd never said at work before. I would say, no, I'm not going to do this project because it doesn't make sense. Before, I was afraid that if you go up against your boss, you're going to get fired or demoted, or you want to please your boss and you want to, and especially as an Indian woman, you're taught to like draw between the lines. And, I've never been a shrinking violet. Like everybody in my family, including the ones who know me from India when I grew up, always thought I was outspoken. I was like a go-getter. But still, when I came to the US, I felt like I had to conform. You have to conform, you have to like find your footing. And while I was going through chemo, and I was having all these things going on at home. I would go into work, wasn't feeling great, but I would just, there was a distraction. It was a way to get through the day. I did a lot of things I could, I would finish my work in 6 hours because I knew that was my endurance, and I was going to go get sick and I didn't want to. have issues at work. So I would rush home, and things, my CEO would be like, hey, I really need you to do this. And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. I would have never said that to a CEO of a startup. I would have never said, oh, you're actually wrong. This is not going to work. And here's why. And I noticed that people were listening to me rather than get yelled at or feel like, get sidelined. I actually started to earn the respect. And I thought, oh my God, all these years I've been, I started, at the bottom, obviously as an immigrant and as a master's student. And then I moved up to management, but it was always middle management. And then when I moved to Florida for my husband's job, I took several steps down and I worked my way back up to middle management. And I always wondered, what does it take to become executive? And it was completely, it was not intentional. I just discovered that speaking my mind is what I needed to do. But then when I actually got my next job, and I loved this place that had taken care of me, but it was associated with cancer. So when I got recruited by another company, I took it, even though I was like, it's not 100% fit, but I'm going to take it. But I went in and I was fearless. I think the number one thing that happened to me after cancer was that the realization that nothing at work that they could do to me or say to me would be worse than what I had already been through. And none of that matters. What other people think of me as a person at the end of the day does not matter. What matters is what I think of myself. Am I delivering on my duties as a mother, as a parent, as a, wife? Am I delivering my duties as an employee to this company? Am I doing what's best for them? And in the middle of it, if I had to deal with egos, it didn't bother me. It didn't mean that I lost it every time. I just figured out which battles to pick, and I did not let it ding my confidence. And so, but the first couple years, I was angry about the financial stress. Why me? The whoa, my God, it's me. Definitely was there. 5 years in, I kind of was like, you know what? I'm doing so much better because I'm confident and I'm fearless and I am just resilient. 10 years in, I look back and I go, I'm so grateful I went through that. It changed me for the better. It made me a better person overall. And post cancer is when I moved up into executive management. It was not something I was expecting. Ironically, on the 10th anniversary of my finding out that I have cancer, is the day I found out that I was going to be promoted to CEO of a company where I was working. And I just felt like it was like a cruel joke. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a prank by my boss that he was leaving and I was going to get his job and the board was going to approve it. And I actually thought it was a prank. I had no reaction. They're like, you should be jumping up and down. Why aren't you saying anything? And all I could think was, today's the 10th anniversary. I'm still processing that. It's so bizarre that it would happen. And I think the universe works in weird ways. But I'll tell you that if I could teach people all the lessons I learned having gone through this so that they don't have to go through it to learn it, I would do it. Like if I could capture this in a bottle or into a cushion and give it to people, I would, because the life lessons I learned going through all of this. It's not just the cancer, it's the financial, it's the societal, it's the, oh my God, am I just idiot? Am I an idiot to put myself in this fix? I could not help getting cancer, but I could have maybe planned better for my finances. The beating up you do for yourself, all of that, I put it behind me. And I would tell you that I have soared since. Like it's not just I did not expect to get on the 50 over 50 list. I did not get to be picked by the GB for the impact list. Last year, I got invited to join the Startup 20 portion of G20. So these are all things that I never planned for or expected, but I'm just committed to my work and also committed to my family to make sure that my kids are prepared for anything.
That is an amazing story, Anu. So let's move on to this rapid fire round, which is going to be lighter than this conversation.
Yes.
So what is one word that describes your journey?
Gosh, the first word that came to me was fun, and I actually questioned myself on it's true or not, but it has been fun. All the ups and downs and sideways. I would not do it any differently.
So, second question, who is your biggest inspiration?
So I struggle to find a person because I'm inspired by a few people, but I'll tell you that growing up in India, I was definitely shaped by Gandhian principles. So I would say the things I take inspiration from is Gandhian principles, but also the Gita. I go back to it. So it's not a person, but I go back to Gita for life lessons and how I see it in action in my life, and how I apply myself.
I think my favorite thing is कर्म को कर्तव्य समझ के करो फलों की चिंता मत करो, which means that just do your job, do not think about the results. Everything will fall in place at some point of time. So that's
That's
from
exactly what
Gita.
happened to me, right? Because I took a job that was hard as a GM and I fixed the business because that was my job. I didn't do it because they're going to promote me. But when I became CEO, it's because I had done that. It was just also the happenstance, right? Like they were splitting the company and it was going to focus on just my business. It made sense. But the point is, none of that I expected. You just do your duty, whether it's a job, at home, at work, if you're volunteering, and things. And it may not seem like in the moment it's falling into place, but it will. It will. It won't be
Definitely.
easy, but it will.
Yeah. So one woman that you admire.
So here also I thought about a lot because you had asked me to think about this. I actually admire some of the not ancestors, but basically my grandmother and also my dad had a aunt, so a grand aunt, I guess, They grew up in villages, My aunt, she was married at 5 and widowed at 7. Imagine that, right? And she was asked to shave her head. She shaved her head her whole life. At 7, shaved her head. Only wore white. She lived to like 104. And and by the time I met her, I remember her, she was already like 90. But what I remember about her is that she was so cheerful. She was so just like I don't know what went through for her when she was young and seeing her siblings get married. I think she helped them deliver babies, blah blah blah. But it was just so she was at peace with herself, and every time we went, she'd cook. She was 90, but she'd cook for us. The other person is my grandmother, my mom's mom. She was married at 12. My grandfather was 27. It was an arranged marriage. She actually had lost when she was born. Her dad died. I don't know how, and then her mom died in postpartum because of shock. So she grew up in a wealthy family, but she was married off to a teacher. And so she had a hard life, but she lived to 94. I just remember thinking these are such resilient women, and I come from the stock. I come from the stock of strong-willed, resilient women who are just accepting life as it is, not necessarily like becoming a doormat, but kind of finding their purpose and living their purpose with authentically living their purpose. You say all these big words, but they don't know all these big words. They just did it. That's what I'm inspired by.
Yeah, that's definitely beautiful. If there's one piece of advice that you could give to your younger self, what would that be?
It would be to not compare yourself to other people. I think culturally we are brought up like that, right? We are a very large country with a lot of people. Everything you're compared with. You're compared with your neighbor's kids' 12th score, and this constant like, oh, that person is a doctor, you're going to be an engineer, which one's better? It's like culturally we do that, but I also think it's not just the culture. I think it becomes ingrained or it's part of us. I'm competitive, right? Even today, I have to like tell myself, remind myself, everyone's path is unique and the journey is never straight and up and to the right. It's always convoluted, right? There's ups and downs and sideways. But as long as you know what your personal purpose is and you're making progress, then it's all good. And I think that's what I needed to tell myself in my 20s. So
Definitely.
many years spent stressing out about not doing as well as the Jonases.
Yeah, I think just like precision medicine, I think there is a precision journey and definition of success for every person. And
Yeah.
I think it has taken me I don't think I've gone beyond it, but I'm still
Yeah,
working
I'm
on
still
it to
working
say
on
that.
it. It's
Yeah,
always
yeah,
like
yeah,
being
yeah.
in remission. It's
If
a
there's one thing
process.
that if there's one thing that you can change about the world, what would that be?
I want people everywhere in the world to know that every other person is a human being. If we just remember that, hopefully then we won't have wars. We won't have discrimination based on color and gender and religious belief. And, because I think in the end, we're all just families trying to take care of our families. And I think that message gets lost when it's us versus them, whether it's discrimination at work, whether it's all the stuff, in society, or if it's wars that's happening everywhere. I just think that we have forgotten our humanity. When someone's in front of you and they disagree with you, they're still a human being. They may not politically agree with you, right? But they're still a human being. They have a mom and a dad, they have kids, they have brothers. And I just want that to be the way. I think point is, I want us to focus on the things that matter, right? How do you solve for hunger? How do you solve for health? How do you solve for a community that's thriving? And we can only get there if you stop thinking of us versus them. And it's a very hard thing to do because humans learn by distinguishing, right? When you're young, learn this is orange, this is blue, this is square, this is circle. That's how our brain works. And so it's something very innate to how we learn, and it's hard to like put that away. But that's what I'd like to see happen.
Anu, so we are almost at the end of the podcast. Anu, is there something that you would like to share with our audience now?
I think I've already talked a lot about my journey. I just want to say that like own your journey, whether it's good or bad, whether it's things you could have done differently, it doesn't matter. Just, do what I did when 2008. I got up every day and said, I'm going to get through today, you know, and not worry about what happened yesterday. It's very hard to do. Now, where I am is I actually do set goals and I try to chase them, right? Because that's part of the thrill as well. But I just want the audience to know that it's important to be kind to yourself also. We get so caught up in, you know, keeping a house a certain way, or are my kids as successful as they should be? But in the end, also be kind to yourself. Maybe you had a bad day, maybe you lost your temper, maybe you didn't do well on a project, but that's okay, right? Because tomorrow is a new day. And I think being kind to ourselves is something that women, especially Indian women, are not very good at. And that's something I'm still learning, by the way. But enjoy the journey, right? Like I said, my journey has been fun. How hard has it been? I've had people tell me, oh, why do you still talk about it? Like you shouldn't play victim. I'm not playing victim. I own it. I own my journey. Like I said, I wouldn't have changed anything. Was it hard? It was horribly hard. But look where I am today. I'm just, figured out a lot of things about me and my life and what I want to do with my life. And for that, I'm grateful. And so I think gratitude, forgiving yourself, and just know that you're not alone. There's a whole support system from people, but also like I think the universe is here to support you. It's hard to think that way sometimes because some days are just bad, but I think there's a purpose in the universe why we're here. And I think we will all be fine.
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to my mind when I hear this story is like, I think two things. One is be fearless, and the second thing is gratitude. Thank the universe for all the experiences, and everything is going to be fine at some point of time.
One
So,
thing I
in
want to add
addition,
to that is also be resilient, right? Be fearless,
definitely.
resilient, and have gratitude.
Definitely. So I wanted to bring in three action items for all of you here. One is understand your body and learn to do a self exam. If you notice a lump, go get it checked by your doctor right away because breast cancer is treatable at early stages, and so do not delay your, doctor visit. And the third thing is if you're over 40 and are due for a mammogram, make a plan to get it done. Thank you so much for joining me and Anu today, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.